Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
So let me tell you a little bit about Patricia, because I want to jump right into our discussion with her. We have her again, and I want to get as much information out of this conversation and discussion and show as we can. Patricia Awyan is she's from the United States, actually, and as she was growing up, she always knew she was going to end up back in Egypt. She felt a very strong connection to Egypt and thought she would end up going home one day, which is kind of weird because I've always felt that about Egypt. Anyway, Patricia's strong and vital connection to nature and interest in the mystical and physical sciences propelled her into a lifelong study of the ancient mysteries. Patricia and her husband, Yousef, are the co-directors of the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism, and together they're sharing the teachings of the world-renowned indigenous wisdom keeper, Abd'el Hakeem Awan. As you all know from documentaries and from studying this particular work, you know him as Hakim. So without further ado, let's welcome Patricia back to the show. Hi, Patricia, how are you?
Hi, Bernard. I'm great. Thank you. Great to be here.
It's so great to hear your voice again and have you back on the show. I really and I'm very honored and I'm very grateful you have the opportunity to take time to join us today. What time is it over there, by the way? I always play this time zone game. What time is it in Egypt right now?
Well, it's just a little bit after 9 o'clock at night.
Oh, okay. So we're not keeping you up too late.
No.
Okay. And you are joining us. You are joining us at the foot of the pyramids. Do you live close to the pyramids in Giza, Patricia?
Oh yeah, we're just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Sphinx entrance of the Giza Plateau. So from my balcony, I have a view of the Sphinx and, of course, the pyramids. So yes, I pinch myself on a daily basis. But
that is so cool.
It's awesome.
Absolutely wonderful. And being that you're from the U.S., tell us a little bit about growing up in the U.S. and how you felt this connection to Egypt. Was it something from the inside? Was it something political or artistically? What drew you as a child growing up here in the United States?
Well, I grew up in way out in the country, actually, in Pennsylvania, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and my father used to get all kinds of magazines like National Geographic and Life magazine and coffee table books. And he would always, I think when I saw my first pictures of Egypt, it was, it's a moment I'll never forget. When I saw the pictures, it stirred something within me. And I felt it, that there was a connection for me to the point. And I must have been maybe 7 or 8, who knows, exactly the age, but I would wait for every National Geographic to come or every Life, and not Life magazine so much, but National Geographic. I'd go through all the pages because many of them in those days had pictures of Egypt. And I would just sit there and look at them for forever and ever. And to the point where I did become a little obsessed and I'd talk about Egypt all the time. And, all my cats would be named different, Isis or, Cleo for Cleopatra, you know what I mean? And at Halloween, I'd dress up in Egyptian themed costumes. And so, yeah, I was a little obsessed for most. And it's just been a theme throughout my life. And probably a connection due to that so much of the, I've always been interested in alternative studies, mysteries, and the esoteric sciences. And of course, so much of that stems from Egypt as well. So this kind of fed my interest throughout my life.
Yeah, exactly. As well for me, I have to mention. I think I shared this the last time you were on the show with us. I remember in fifth grade, I was asked to do a what do they call those things where the kids do a diorama or whatever.
Oh, wow.
And the first thing I did was grab a bar of dial soap and carve it into a pyramid. And I was like, oh, I'm going to do Egypt.
I love it. Gee, I never thought of that.
I was like, that is, and it just being fascinated by it, absolutely. And it was, of course, a couple years later, I got involved in the esoteric, and I was like, oh, so this is where that's coming from. But I wasn't lucky enough to have the opportunity to move to Egypt and fall in love with the son of a wisdom keeper. So, how can you tell us a little bit about that? I would love to hear a little bit of how you came to Egypt and became a part of this great family that you're now a member of.
Well, it kind of is a magical story, and it is the story that I could probably write a book about. So I want to be very brief here. But when I finally, heard the voice, I'm one that's just guided by instinct, I guess. And, it was finally like, okay, it's time to go to Egypt. I knew what I wanted, and I wanted to come, and I decided to come with a group because I had a feeling it was going to be such an amazing experience that it would be a good idea to have somebody make all the arrangements and I could just be there. Yeah. So I wanted to come on a tour. And so I researched all the possible tours that were going in the coming year and discovered this tour that was called the Star Elders Tour. And when I read about Hakim, who was a featured speaker, he was going to lecture on the tour, I was immediately intrigued by what I read, and it was the tour led by Stephen Mailer. And so I immediately, went to the itinerary, loved everything, decided this was the tour for me, and went out and bought Stephen's books and read them, and just everything that he and Hakim put together for these books was resonated with me. And so this was the build up for me coming. And of course, I fell in love with Egypt. I heard Stephen talking a little bit about that. I immediately fell in love with Egypt and felt that it was home. Had many powerful experiences. Fell in love with Hakim and his message, and of course Stephen's passion and energy and love for what he taught was so catchy. I mean, it was just a marvelous experience. And I had to come back. And strangely enough, and I don't want to make too long a story out of this.
That's fine.
I had told Stephen on the tour, we had met up on deck of the cruise ship that we were on. And I said to Stephen, you know what would make this better is if we had a little bit more time at the sites. And why can't we invite Hakim to come with us on a tour? And so that's exactly what he went back and had organized. And so, boy, it was about a year and a half or 2 years later that I'm on another tour. Oh, and by the way, I didn't meet my husband at that point. He was not home. I met the entire Awyan family except for Yousef.
Oh, wow.
And, of course, fell in love with him. And so I came back again to be on this tour where Hakim came out of retirement. And so he and Stephen led this tour, which was just phenomenal. I cannot tell you. And we went to Amarna on this trip. So it was just so many highlights. And again, I went home and felt like, I'm not done yet. It actually came to the point where I went back to the States and felt like I was left home behind me. Oh. And just, I came back for the third time, not on a tour. And this is when I met Yousef. And, I was invited to stay. I came with just some friends, and we popped in on the Awyan family, and they invited me to stay. And I did, and I spent a lot of time with Hakim and got a chance to truly meet Yousef and basically felt and saw what he just had the wisdom, and he had been studying all of his life, and he was just amazing. So the rest is history.
How beautiful. How beautiful. And it does sound, I love the way that you said it. It sounds like destiny. Thank you. Kismet, I guess.
We felt that. We just felt. I mean, even meeting each other, we both, from the beginning, this is how it felt. And even when you try to play with destiny, it has a way of bringing you back in line. So, it's an amazing thing. And
So
even today, I can't tell you, but yes.
it's wonderful, and it's wonderful the work that you both are doing together with the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism and the tours, and you really have become the how shall I say it, a channel for good on the planet. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about Hakeem. Now he passed away how long ago now?
It was in August of 2008. So,
2008.
yeah, about a little over 6 years ago.
And
And
what was it about him? For those that don't know Hakeem, I'm sure a lot of our listeners already know who he is and the work that he's done. But if you were to describe him to someone who doesn't know what he is or what he did for the Kemet line of wisdom, how would you explain that to the layperson?
boy, he was absolutely amazing. Now, I don't want to tell you the whole story again of his childhood and how he came to be who he was, but he grew up here. The house we're in is, this is where he lived. And so the Giza Plateau was his playground. And he became, he was, the kids would go out looking for treasures or be sent out by their relatives to look for treasures. And he would be scanning, the site and looking at the artifacts and the pictures on the temples. And he just became, just fell in love with the heritage of what he was finding. And he did get his degrees in archaeology and Egyptology. But even, what amazes me is he took that and he came back and he told me and others that the hardest thing he ever had to do was unlearn what he learned in university because it didn't explain what he saw, what he could experience, but what he saw at the sites, the anomalies. And this is why Stephen and Hakeem developed the field of Khemitology, because Egyptology does not address the things that we see and find in plain sight at the sites. And to take that further, he was an expert etymologist. And I talk about this because when you study words and language to the point that he did, he could read and write in 8 different languages and had a little bit of an understanding in probably many more. But I remember asking him about certain words. He could tell you the migration of the meaning of an origin of a word and how it migrated and its meaning would be changed through different countries. For example, like in France, a word might mean no, and in Italy, it means yes. And then he would sit back and smile as if, do you get what I'm saying? And it was like, absolutely. He could look at the symbolism and see that at an early stage, even way back in Egyptian, when we look at the history or of the symbolism in Egypt, it was manipulated, at many points, and so we can't, you have when you're studying these things, the symbolism itself the meanings have been changed and switched. So I hope I'm making sense here, but it's really amazing way of looking at everything. And the other thing that was remarkable about him and spending time with him is many people from all over the world, even while I was there, maybe 10, 12 days, people came just to sit and talk with him. And I noticed that many of them would come and they'd ask him lots of questions. And sometimes they'd ask him the same question. And the funny thing was, he'd answer differently to who was asking the question. He answered to the level of their understanding. So it wasn't about him, being an ego and saying, this is how it is, here's your answer. He was really talking to them at a gut level and at a level they could understand what it was he was trying to express. So, that's a true master.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very important as a master and a teacher to be able to do that. So that's absolutely beautiful that he did that. I first was introduced to Hakeem, well, through his work. Geez, back in 2007, 2008, perhaps. Was it the Pyramid Code or or was it Magical Egypt? I don't know. One of
Pyramid Code by Carmen Bulcher.
Yes, yes. That was absolutely amazing. And as a matter of fact, I still have it on my list on Netflix and rewatch it from time to time.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a fantastic, fantastic documentary, and he speaks with such knowledge and wisdom and clarity, which is a lot of and you know, like you said, you were talking about Egyptology, where a lot of this stuff is just repeated or parroted, quote unquote, empirical information that's been accepted by the masses,
Hmm.
where you could tell he was speaking from his gut, from experience versus, like you said, the book knowledge that was presented.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he taught us, he taught his whole family that to look at things from a different or higher perspective, that, not to accept everything at face value, but to go out and look with your own eyes and take a walk around things. Don't just accept, but really study things from all angles. It's an interesting way to look at life. And boy, today, after my many years of study, it certainly makes a lot of sense. There's so many dimensions and levels to understanding everything in our reality.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, a lot of the esoteric and how shall we say, Western occult brotherhoods are known for that, to layer different meanings into so many different things, and how it really does can be interpreted differently for different people as well. Now,
Absolutely.
Patricia, tell us a bit about the beginning of the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism. What was the intention behind creating this?
Well, as I said, one of the things that I found most noteworthy about Hakeem is that people, experts in their field, people from all walks of life, would come here to this doorstep here where I live now just to sit and talk with Hakeem, to share knowledge. And it was a case of they would share with him, as I said, many experts. I mean, you had people like Greg Braden and Barbara Hand Clow, and I'm not going to give you a whole long list, but people from everywhere came. And of course, they shared with him and he shared with them. And we loved, Yousef and I discussed, we somehow the legacy of his work had to live on. And what better way than to have an open forum, where we wanted to create that same energy of a place where people can meet, students and teachers. We're all students and teachers, to share what we know so that we can get a better, fuller understanding from, again, that higher perspective. And that's basically what the Kemet School is. It's not a physical school, but it's a forum. We have a Facebook group page that's very large and very active.
Yeah.
And we have an open door here, and we really, and yes, Yousef and I host tours, and we work with people who just knock on the door and say, can you show me the pyramids? We do custom experiences, because not only, and the funny thing is, we see some of these sites, over, umpteen, 20, 30, 40 times, and every time we go, we're like little kids in a candy store, because we're not only learning and seeing new things. Strangely enough, there's so much to experience here, but the people we bring and that come with us, that are drawn to come, also have something to offer. And so there's an exchange, an interaction of so many different things that makes this work so exciting. But that's what the Kemet School is. It's open to all who are interested in ancient Egypt, Kemet, and ancient mysteries all over the world. We're making connections with what we're discovering that are worldwide.
And that's a beautiful way to do it. I feel, I almost feel like a kind of like a proud father, because we kind of do the same thing at GIC. It's just an open forum. Let's share the information. And I love that is the motivation behind it. Because for me, I started GIC because I come from a lot of these old, oh, I don't want to say old, but whether it be a pagan coven or a mystical brotherhood or something like that, but it was all kept in secret. And I
Hmm.
remember the beginning stages of social networking on MySpace. Boy, I'm aging myself now. Back in the MySpace days,
Well,
I
that's
would,
not that long
I
ago.
know, I know. I would post something and I would get emails from, oh, I don't know, a lodge master or a high priestess or somebody like, you can't share that information. I said, oh, yeah? Watch
Mm.
me. Like, we are sharing all of this information for the public. This is not about making money. This is not about, an elite, spiritual group of people. This is about information that should be available to everybody. And and what I love about the work that you're doing is that you're really at the forefront of all of this because this is kind of the beginning of mysticism, esotericism, the understanding of human nature, our relationship with nature, our relationship with our divine self. Suppose speaking uh, metaphorically, but it really means a lot that way because, and we're going to talk about this more on the show. Whereas in the past, tell us how it was in the past. How did people get information in ancient Egypt if they wanted to become spiritual masters? How did the
Well,
priesthood go about it?
when you say ancient Egypt, that covers a span of
Okay,
thousands of
during
civilizations.
the dynastic period.
Okay. Ah.
During the
We prefer,
dynastic period, how did they
prefer
go about?
the dynamic period ourselves.
Yes, yeah.
Well, yeah, the way we've been taught, and what we're discovering, and even what's the indigenous talk about this worldwide, that we cycle through ages of consciousness, and so we go through high ages and we go through low cycles, and dynastic times is basically when we dip into this low cycle. And this is about, when you think of the priests of Amun, this was the time that the secrets become hidden. And what Hakim would talk about is he would call them the Hanut. This was his word for it. But this is the time when the priests, which Hakim and Yousef call the first, those that had the first harvestless jobs. So again, everything is labeled in terms of nature. So, everybody in the community is contributing in some way. And then you've got this group of, so-called priests who come up with a whole program created to support them where they don't really have to do anything. And they do this utilizing the concepts of, first of all, they introduce the idea of death, which during pre-dynastic times, or during the higher state of consciousness and awareness, everyone understood, that we are eternal. Okay. And then this concept of death is introduced, that we have a physical death and that there is a divine judgment and therefore a need for salvation. And so you have, and you even see in the papyrus, the judgment scenes where they're weighing the feather against the heart. And of course, what are your chances of your heart being lighter than a feather? And of course, if it's not, you're going to be eaten by those beasts, over there. So that they use fear and separation to basically control. And so they say the first harvestless. I say, are they harvesting our energy, to feed themselves? And the Hanut, you could liken to today, our politicians and our corporate leaders and our religious leaders, because they still use these same divide and conquer paradigms to, to keep us basically, under control. And so you asked about how they gain their knowledge. There was a separation. So, they developed these mystery schools or whatever you can call them. They'd have initiates or priestesses of Isis and priestesses of, of Hathor. And, they break it down. And then within each temple or whatever, they would break even that down. If you've reached this level of understanding, then you're allowed to go, much further into the temple. But only the high priest, the very elite, can hang on to all the secrets, the highest level of understanding, And you can again talk about the symbolism with this. They are given the highest level of understanding of all the secrets, and they're the only ones that get to go into the Holy of Holies to experience the most powerful energies that exist within this temple. So, it was really who you were and what level you're able to achieve.
Patricia, we have a break coming up. We'll be right back after this message and continue this fascinating talk on the Hanud and the priesthood.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio. We are speaking with Patricia Awyan on ancient Kemetic and Egyptian mysteries. And before we went on the break, Patricia was speaking with us. I had asked Patricia how they kept the secrets back in the dynastic periods, and we're going to talk a little bit about the differences in these different periods throughout the show. Welcome back to the show, Patricia. Do you have any idea where you left off?
I think I was just about coming to a close on what I was saying, but basically that there was a separation, even within the initiates, within the mystery schools, of how much knowledge would be given based on, the individual's level of understanding, or maybe even who and what they stood for in the community. And of course, not everybody was part of that. You had, it was just these people that came as students or initiates to the temples.
And what's so strange to me, and I see this, I love to watch shows like House of Cards, these type of political shows. And it seems like the same thing goes on within our governments, how, you have to be a certain level of clearance, and this is classified and whatnot. And, goddess forbid there is true transparency in anything. And that's, again, going back to what I said about you starting the Kemet School and why we started the G.I.C. was to have transparency in this type of information. I feel it's very important that people are given the totools and to have a forum to discuss their own personal spiritual evolution. I
agree.
I have a joke, and this is what started the whole G.I.C. thing. I think I told you I used to get contacted by high priestesses and whatnot. How many Gardnerian witches does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Okay. How many?
Shh, it's a secret. And you can interplay that with Freemasons and every other.
I know. Yeah. No, that's always that, and the rituals and the statements of belief. And these are things that as I was growing up, I found I couldn't become a member or join anything because I didn't want to give my power away. I didn't want to stand up and I used to ask people in church I'd ask them questions about some of the things they would say. I'd say, why do you say I believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost? Do you know what a Holy Ghost is? Most of the adults I asked didn't even know. They say it. You get up and you make these statements, and this is what I believe, and you sometimes don't even know what you're saying.
You say that again.
And to me, everybody has to go within to find their individual truths, that we're all here to share and learn and grow. And the teacher appears just when you need him. However, when it really comes to our own truth, our own, interaction or understanding of this reality we're experiencing, we have to go within to find that.
Exactly.
I don't want somebody outside myself to define and tell me who I am.
Exactly. And speaking of going inside, what is it what was the greatest message that perhaps, and maybe we could talk about the pre-dynastic now, was that the message as far as their spirituality? Everything is inside of us. That I guess what is it? The Hermes Trismegistus. Did I say that right?
You're pretty close. Better than I could have, maybe.
Trismegistus. I can never say that word correctly. but it talks about what is above, so below, what is within is without. Is that a part of the message that we got before the dynastic mysticism took over?
I believe absolutely. When I study the symbolism and what it really means, and of course, we haven't mentioned that this pantheon of gods and goddesses that we've been taught to believe that the Egyptians were worshiping were actually representations. They were symbolic of cosmic forces and natural, aspects of nature. And so this is extremely important. And when you understand exactly the whole nature of this belief and what these symbols, these netters and the mythologies were really referring to, then you're really absolutely seeing that they understood the nature of the cycles, how energy works, how wave patterns work, and how the cycles of the stars, everything that we're experiencing, if we study it outside ourselves, it's really a reflection of what's happening within on every level. So it's fascinating, and it's amazingly complex and yet so simple.
Yeah.
And they understood it at a level that we're just now figuring out.
You just gave me an aha moment, and I don't have very many of these quite often, especially during a radio show. So thank you. I'm going to ask you if I'm right in what I'm feeling right now. So the idea that the netters or the gods and goddesses, let's say, I don't know, Anubis with the dog head or whatever, all the different animalistic heads that we see, like Sekhmet or Bas with these lion and cat heads and whatnot. Is it fair to say it could parallel the idea of the animal spirits of, let's say, Native American belief systems? Is that kind of what they were doing? They incorporated the belief system or the spirit of that particular animal to represent?
There might be a relationship in how the symbolism is used of these. I find many examples of the same use of symbolism across the different Native American star lores, or whatever you want to call it. As even when I was in Peru and Bolivia, I was amazed at some of the symbolism I came across that totally mirrors what I'm finding here. And I didn't even tell you I've been in Australia and was blown away by what I discovered in the star lore and the stories that have been handed down for not only thousands of years, but probably tens of thousands of years. Right. The heritage in Australia is amazing, and it totally mirrors what we're discovering here. So, it's no accident that they use some of the same forms of symbolism. However, when I look at the Egyptian, because this is what I know best, this is where most of the focus of my research has been on, you can tell that they understood the functioning of these animals, birds, crocodiles, whatever it is they used, to a level where they understood every part of how this animal exists. Mm-hmm. And so that's what they incorporate when they, incorporate that into the symbolism of what the netter represents. And maybe it's just by divine design, but it's just phenomenal when you consider how it all works. I mean, I discover things just by finding, you'll see news reports about scientific finds and things, and we'll discover something like, just for example, the scarab beetle, the Kepper is what it's called, is always been related to pushing the sun across the Milky Way, representing the cycles of consciousness. And yet we just discovered within the last 10 to 15 years that these scarab beetles, excuse me, who, and there's so much symbolism involved with the scarab, but just one of the things they do is they put their young, their eggs into a dung ball, and they roll it up a mound, just like you're rolling it across the heavens, okay? And because all the other scarabs in the neighborhood, so to speak, one will come at you and try to steal your dung ball. They have to push it in a straight line. And we've just discovered that they do this because they have a magnetic connection to the Milky Way. And so this is how they form that straight line, so perfectly, as they are connected to the Milky Way. Can you imagine? And this is the symbolism. So, this is how in depth they understood our natural world. And as I said, we're just now learning some of these things.
It almost sounds to me, I find a big correlation to what we would call, I don't want to say modern, but let's say in the last 2,000 years of shamanism. I mean, shamanism that we know that we're being, taught today in the 21st century or during the 20th century was all about, watching how the bird flies or watching how the rabbit digs its hole, that there were patterns and everything. I remember a teacher once told me, if you watch the birds flap their wings, you can see the whole story of the universe in the way they flap their left wing. And I'm like, what?
I love it. What a great teacher.
And it makes complete sense, and what you're describing, and I can't help but wonder, and because I've heard stories of this, especially with so many people that I guess now it's become very popular to go to Peru and have the shamanic vision quest using the ayahuasca medicine. If some of these images that we're seeing with the gods, maybe they were images of beings they saw on other transdimensional levels, perhaps. Was there any sign of hallucinogens being used back then? I think I heard about, was it the lotus? What did they use in Egypt? I forgot.
Well, yeah, there is talk of different things that they found.
Blue lotus.
The blue lotus, or the water, the water lily. Yes, they did utilize the oils. They made teas or put it in wine. It does have certain properties. There are other things that I think that might be involved in that. In the black earths, there might have been some elements within the black earth that made a difference. But these are things we need to further research. However, yeah, they did utilize the properties of plants and what have you. But again, this is during dynastic times. If you consider that in a higher cycle, we are in we exist in a higher vibrational reality and therefore have higher sensibilities, you find that there's no need for aid in getting to that state that we strive so hard for. Those of us that are studying these things and work with meditation and going to these power sites, we have moments of amazing euphoria where we hit this, I don't know whether we're there's an electromagnetic field that's created, that we're experiencing something that's beyond dimension. I guess that's the best way I can explain it. But this is what we're all keep striving for, which I think is just how, things were when we live in this higher vibrational cycle. We're still running after that feeling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have about 10 minutes left on this particular segment, but I'm wondering if I can change the topic just a little bit, because I guess this is a personal curiosity. Speaking about dynastic, pre-dynastic and dynastic period initiation process, I kind of just, like, my heart melted when you said, oh, Ma'at, well, actually, let me just explain. This might take longer than 10 minutes. When I had I was initiated as a priest of Isis, okay? And during the initiation process, it was the whole thing with the blindfold and all that. But as far as the Egyptian aspects of it, I remember I had to do the whole, 101 confessions. And I don't know if that really did come from dynastic, pre-dynastic, or somebody made it up. But it was things like, I will not, desanctify an altar. I will not steal my neighbor's ass, or, something to that extent. There were 101 confessions, and you had to have a majority of, no, I never did that before, in order to pass. But again, the whole imagery of Ma'at weighing the the soul on the feather was a big part of it. It was
Yeah.
almost as if they used the quote unquote modern Egyptian Book of the Dead as a part of this ritual, and we had to like go through the Egyptian Book of the Dead while we're still alive. It was a very convoluted, Golden Dawny type, Masonic thing I had to do. But I'm wondering, um, was Ma'at a different Neter pre-dynastic? And I guess that's what I'm asking. Is Anubis really the god that guards the initiation process? Does he guard the temples of wisdom? I mean, what do we what? In other words, modern esotericism versus what they really meant before the Hanut came along. What is Anubis then compared to now? What was Ma'at then compared to now?
Well, and again, this takes a great deal of research to get back to before the twists, and what I see with the symbolism. Now, first I'm going to say, yeah, what I see with the symbolism. We talk about site transformation as far as many thousand years of site occupation. So you go to the Giza Plateau and you see evidence from pre-dynastic times all the way up to maybe Coptic times. Not so much at the Giza Plateau, but in other sites. The same thing happens with the symbolism. The symbolism not only gets twisted by priests or people with agenda, but you also have us moving through cycles where people just change the form. They use the same formula and they change the labels and the icons, which is kind of similar to what the Romans take a lot of the Egyptian letters, and they put their cast on them, and the Greeks did the same thing. So you have Thoth or Jehuti. The original name was Jehuti, then it becomes Thoth, but in the Greeks called him Hermes, and the Romans called him Mercury. So again, you have to look at the migration. They also, some of the symbolism or the mythologies would change according to where you are, so geographically, and of course if there's an agenda. But so many things affect the stories. The story changes sometimes when the cycle changes. So as we move through the ages of Leo, Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, everything changes. So you'll see, Christianity comes in, the symbols being the fish, keeping it simple, and so new labels, new name, the whole thing. So when you're asking me about Anubis, I think, okay, which cycle? Was the original Anubis Whippewat? Whippewat, you may not have heard of, but he's like described as either a gray wolf or a jackal, where Anubis is the black jackal. Both are known to be the path opener. So the way I look at it, and from what I've studied, is Anubis is associated with being at the helm when you walk through the gates, the dimensions. When you're walking through the temple, each gateway, every time you walk through a gateway, you're moving through into another energetic, it's an energetic portal, basically. So you're moving. The temples are created with geometric patterns that actually are interacting with you as you move through them. So every time you move through a gate, you're moving into another energy. It's the same thing as we move through the cycles. And so Anubis represents, this, are you ready to move through that portal at this point? He's the gatekeeper, but he's really the path opener.
Ah, I like that very much. He's one of my favorites. That's why I ask.
Yeah, I like him too. And Whippewat. Whippewat's.
Whippewat.
I mean, there's a lot more that can be said, but yeah, Whippewat. Fascinating.
Okay. And as far as Ma'at, I think I remembered reading a myth, and I'm assuming this was like a later myth. I'm hoping it was a later myth, where she just went crazy on Egypt and like poured blood in the streets and got really kind of like a whole Yahweh thing,
Now that's second.
And so is that the pre-dynastic version of Ma'at, or would that be the...
Okay. Ma'at is actually balance.
Right.
And again, pre-dynastic, we see some of the symbols, but we don't have writings in pre-dynastic times.
Okay.
There was no need for writing. People understood. And so we see the symbolism come, just in early pre-dynastic times through dynastic times. We don't know where the symbols actually came from, but they tell an amazing story. And some of the symbolism is more ancient. There are symbols like the Khemitology that, are much more ancient than, some of the symbols that we see. You see the Khemitology even with icons. The original Khemitology had no images with it, just the Khemitology itself. But anyway, your question was about Ma'at. She basically was the only neter aspect of nature that didn't have a consort. She represents that complete balance of the polarities, where when we talk about the 360 netters, there were 180 feminine and 180 masculine, representing the dual nature of all things. Everything has a polar opposite in a three-dimensional world or reality.
So Ma'at being one without a consort would have to represent both the masculine and the feminine of that particular energy of balance.
Perfect balance. To me, it's almost like resonance. It's natural law. She becomes associated, thanks to the Hanut, with judgment. Judgment is one of the tools they use. And so then we get the rules. We get the 42 laws of this or that, or, we get the judgment scene. They create the mummification process, and it becomes all about death. And if you think about this is huge, Bernard. When they created the concept of death, they changed the energetic pattern of our reality. Because when you believe you're eternal, there is nothing to fear, correct? We're just experiencing reality. But the minute... And you're a young child. We're told this when we go to Sunday school. When we're little kids. You're going to die. And guess what? You're going to be judged. And if you sin, you're going to go to hell. Now, how does a young child deal with this concept? It's amazing. So they grip us with fear at such a young age and then control us for the rest of our lives through this fear of this judgment and this possibility of going to hell. And
Anyway, well, thank you for that, Patricia. We got a break, and we're going to continue this fascinating discussion on Egyptian mysticism when we return after this break.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We are having a wonderful, wonderful conversation today with Patricia Awyan, speaking to us live from Cairo, Egypt Giza, the Giza Plateau on the Egyptian mysteries and her work with the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism. And we are covering a lot of ancient mysticism today. Welcome back, Patricia. The next thing I'm very interested in knowing, and you mentioned something earlier in the broadcast about the Holy of Holies, and I've always been very fascinated by that because not only do we see that in Egyptian culture, we saw it in the Temple of Solomon and so many other religious places around the world, and I remember Stephen was on a couple of weeks ago, and he talked a little bit about how they were energetic centers, but you went on to talk a little bit how people had to kind of like pay to go in or had to initiate to go in. What was the Holy of Holies, and when did that concept start?
Well, my feeling, and I believe Stephen spoke a little bit about this, is the Holy of Holies existed, of course, in pre-dynastic times. We see amazing, like you see what they call altars, but they're, we believe, these things in the Holy of Holies come from the pre-dynastic, the ancient temple below the temple from this high stage of Kemet. And so this is part of the temple that they quarried, and we now see in some of the dynastic temples today in the Holy of Holies. And basically, no, you couldn't pay to get in.
Oh, no. Okay.
Maybe there were a few priests that would accept a little bakshish or tips, but for the most part, they would say that only they had reached this level, this of awareness, that they could withstand the power of this Holy of Holies. Now, that there was a time when this was available for all of us. I believe the whole concept of temple, we see a temple today as a place to go and worship a god. I believe that they were originally built as places where we would go to, on pilgrimage, but to rejuvenate our body, minds, and spirits. These temples themselves interact with our body, mind, and spirit as we move through them from every stage, from every gate that we walk through. They still have an effect on us today, and it can be huge. And it's not only the sacred geometric. They set things up in a way that energy actually flows in nature, and so that this is how they built the temples, and they used a combination of stones, different kinds of stones, both igneous, crystalline stones, and all these specific different stones: basalt, granite, alabaster, calcite, white calcite, or milky quartz, and many different things, types of stone, for their combination of their individual energies coming together, and then they align them to certain stellar and solar events, and all of these things had an effect on, as I said, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual bodies as you walk through them. And so this final step, the seed of the temple, the seed, which I call the pineal gland of the temple, is the most powerful spot in the temple. And that was only reserved for the high priest.
I'm sitting here. I'm sorry, Patricia, go on.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say later, you can find chambers and things near these Holy of Holies where they would allow people in, and then they would be tricksters that would pretend that they were, speaking from the gods, and they would, this was all part of the Hanut game.
Like Wizard of Oz behind the curtain.
That's exactly what it was. And, the keepers love to show us some of these areas, and it's so obvious. And, if you really believe that this is, you can be led to believe anything.
Unfortunately, as you're speaking of this and you're talking about how these chambers and whatnot were created, I couldn't help but think back to the other documentary I mentioned, Magical Egypt, where they kind of really went into an in-depth discussion about the Temple of Man. And I just did a quick Google search, and they're showing diagrams, and it's exactly what you said. The Holy of Holies is like right over the pineal gland. So very interesting. Have you had the opportunity? I'm guessing you've gone through the Temple of Man yourself and experienced the energy there, or?
Many times. It's funny. Every temple, everybody experiences Egypt differently, and some temples awaken something in one person that, doesn't do anything for someone else. We see this, and we've led so many groups through Egypt, so I've been able to experience a lot. But your question about the temple, many people respond to this temple. Now, the Holy of Holies in this particular temple is in question. Now, you were talking about John Anthony West, who I have a great admiration and respect for. Love Magical Egypt. Mm-hmm. Now, the whole concept or idea, Schwaller de Lubitz would have said that the Holy of Holies is within the temple grounds today. And Hakim has told us that the true Holy of Holies is actually in a different location. So there is a question. He says it's much further away and underneath the Winter Palace. And so obviously not a place we're going to be able to get to today. Mm. If that's the case, then the whole concept of this part of the temple being reflective of the temple of man doesn't work. However, when I look at the work and I read Schwaller de Lubitz, which is not easy, and I've listened to many interviews with John Anthony West and read a lot of his material, I give everything, I have an open mind, and I can see a lot of what he has said makes sense to me. So there's also the concept of that the temple of Luxor is connected to the temple of Karnak by what they call the Ram Road, or the Avenue of Sphinxes, which they're just now excavating and trying to uncover. And we've decided as soon as they open it, we're going to walk from one temple to the other. But anyway, there are some that say that the temple of Luxor is the temple of man, and the temple of Karnak is the temple of the universe, the reflection as above, so below. There is a lot to be said for that. And I do feel that we are looking at the body of everything is based on our biology, because as above, so below, as we discussed, as within, so without. So when Yousef and I look at these structures and the layout of many of these monument sites, we can see that it's patterned after the biology of and the symbolism. So, when you look at the Giza Plateau, you're looking at the mound, the womb, and then the pyramid is really the seed, because there's even a symbol that shows, the symbol for seed is the pyramid. So there's a reflection here. Everything is based on biology. There's just so many things to look at when you're looking at everything here in Egypt.
And as we know, the dynastic period, they were especially the mummifiers were very concerned about biology and our organs.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? The process itself was totally about the Hanut and getting money and burying everybody with gold. Bring me offerings and bring me lots of gold. Horus will tip the scales and you'll go to, whatever. But in the end, I believe there's a lot of esoteric knowledge hidden within the ritual of the mummification process itself. Because this is how they hid secrets. It's almost, it's the same with when I looked at what the Australian Aboriginals do. The ceremonies, these ceremonies themselves have secrets hidden within them. Within the ceremony itself.
Now, as far as the mummification process, or maybe I should just say the burial process, because once one was mummified, they were buried within a tomb. What was it? What were done with the corpses when one rested prior to the Hanut? What did they bury them? Did they do the what do they call the air burial, sky burial, like the Buddhists used to do, which kind of I want to do, but
well, that there's a question about that. They have. I believe that there are some maybe pre-dynastic mummies. They haven't found a lot, but basically. I believe Hakim once talked about the possibly the burning of bodies, but how can we know for sure if we're talking 10 to 50,000 years ago and we haven't found remains?
Wow, exactly. And of course, I have to bring this up: the Sphinx. What was Hakim's idea on the Sphinx? What was it? A lion head before? We all can see it's a smaller head now. What do we think it was prior to that?
We do believe it was a lion for many reasons, which I don't have a lot of time to go into. But we definitely believe that it probably originally had the head of a lion. The lion symbolism is very strong here. Hakim told us that she, not a he, she represented Tefnut, the Neter Tefnut, who is water or mist. The spit of Nut, which is Nut is the sky, the Milky Way, the sky during the day. And of course, the Sphinx here, the whole Giza Plateau, part of the network of what the Giza Plateau is, this energy system or device, is running water. And her paws would have been, close to the Nile, and the water may have run right up through, right up through her paws. Tefnut, her symbolism is still all over the world. We see her as fountainheads, the lion fountainheads everywhere. I saw them in Glastonbury.
Oh, wow.
And you see them in churches, in cathedrals all over Europe, and you see it in Japan. You see it, the lion that you find at fountains or at spouts, this is Tefnut, and it all goes back to Egypt. And you actually see her on all the temples, many of the temples. I don't know if all, but we see it at Dendera, the Temple of Hathor, at Philae, the Temple of Isis. Even at Hatshepsut's temple, we see these lion-headed spouts related to water in Tefnut. And this is who we believe the Sphinx is, for sure. And of course, her head is not, we believe it was recarved many times and is out of proportion with the size of the body. And we just completed a tour with Dr. Robert Schock and his beautiful wife, Katie, an amazing man who has made history with his findings about the Sphinx. And he also believes that she most likely had a lion head at one time. And of course, he is the one that was responsible for pushing the date back further than what we've all been told, the 4,000 years ago.
So
6,000 years ago.
How long do we through, at least through your observations and through the work of Hakim and through everybody and the wonderful community that you guys have, how long or how old is the Egyptian civilization? Do we feel, or from what we see?
Well, what we see dynastically, we can date it back. They date it back to the classic 6,000 years of civilization. What we're looking at, we talk, and this is another thing, we had so much in common with what Dr. Schock teaches. He talks about, pre-cataclysm and then, after the cataclysm. And it's so obvious when you travel again the world, you see this evidence of a huge cataclysm that, rocked our earth, maybe about 10,700 BC or give or take or whatever around that time. And so when we talk about, there are definitely, we find evidence of structures that were built long before this. And of course, we find underground tunnels and chambers and many, many levels at many different places here in Egypt. And this is another thing you find worldwide. So, we talk about, if there was a cataclysm and people had to go underground, and then you come back out and you have inherited what's left. And so this is what we feel is what happened during the early dynasties is they inherited these sites and were still possibly somewhat still active. And then we see a decline in technology and craftsmanship from that point forward. But how far back does the pre-dynastic time go? How many cycles have we been through? We can't even, they say civilization's only been around for 6,000 years, but it's quite obvious to those who've traveled or studied, alternative researchers, that, we find evidence of civilization 10,000, 50,000, maybe 100,000 years ago, but maybe we've cycled many, many times.
Well, we certainly could have. We've been here for, how long is the Earth? How old is the Earth now? 200
3.6 billion?
Yeah, 2 billion, 3 billion years. God only knows. And how arrogant of us to think that we're the first, civilization, or the last 5,000-10,000 years.
6,000 years that man has been civilized. Yeah,
and they tell us man's been around for what, 2 million years or something like. I don't know. Maybe there's different versions.
We saw footprints here in Egypt up at the COL Oasis, or right in the desert there, that they date 2 to 3 million years old here in Egypt. So
it's absolutely fascinating. Now, speaking of fascinating, and speaking of the Kemet, I was very lucky to speak with oh geez, I've already forgotten his name. And forgive me. I was speaking with a young a priest in training, quote unquote, of the Dogon people, and they believe that they were the exiles of the Egyptian dynasty era, whatever, and went off and carried the I guess the wisdom of ancient Egypt with them. And I'm sure some of it is folklore and whatnot, but yet we find so many interesting facts when it comes to, especially the Dogon with Sirius and how they discovered what was a Sirius B before, and whatnot. What is how much of the association between ancient Egypt and the modern Dogon do you know of, and perhaps the history of all of that? Were they I guess refugees of ancient Egypt?
Well, yeah, what you've described is exactly what we've all heard, and you know, it's amazing when you do hear, you know, from some of the elders from this tribe, and some of what I've heard. And again, you have to sift through it and use discernment, but there are obvious connections. And my only question would be, what level of understanding did they bring with them? They obviously had some of the esoteric knowledge that was held by the elite few. And I see lots of, you know, relationships, and yet, you know, unless all is divulged, we're still not seeing everything. And as you said, this is during dynastic times, so you know we're still looking at something that's already been altered in some way.
Yes, absolutely, and unfortunately, they, from what I understand, they are very patriarchal and whatnot. So it must come from the dynastic period.
Well, this is my feeling. This is all indicative of when we fall into this cycle of separation.
And
But it's funny you bring Sirius up, because this is one of the things we talk about is the possibility of a binary system, and that our sun, you know, 60 to 70% of stars that we study are in binary systems with other stars. They revolve around other stars. So there's a very good chance that our sun revolves around another star, which would explain why we would cycle through dark and golden ages. Because, and it would explain why we fall into separation and come back into unity. If this big bright star, or another star even, we know how the sun feeds us. You know, without the sun, of course, we don't exist, but we can be fed. But we are fed by the sun. And if we consider that there's another sun, another star that comes closer, and it's going to affect us. It's going to affect our cycles, our solar cycles, and in turn affect our vibration. Because if you study this Schumann resonance, you know that our sun, these solar flares, which I liken to Sekhmet, the Netter Sekhmet, has an effect on our own Earth's pulse, our vibration. It changes it. So, you know, you would consider a binary star coming closer, affecting our vibration, bringing us back into maybe a state of higher consciousness and awareness. And then as it pulls away again, we fall into a dark age of separation, reflective of a regular day and night cycle, or even our yearly cycle, which we have a summer, which would be considered the day, and the winter considered the night. It's almost holographic. It is holographic.
yeah, I love what you're saying. Thank you for that. Actually, it, it would be ignorant for us to say we're not affected by the moon, that we're not affected by the stars, that we're not affected by the sun. And it's very interesting, because I will say that when I did have my discussion with these Dogon elders, that's all they talked about was the relationship between the planets and the energies and the correspondences, and how the alignments affected humanity and affected the universe, and it was just absolutely fascinating.
Yep. And this is what you find all over the world, and that many of even our religious doctrines and dogma, if you look within the stories, you'll find they're talking about star cycles. and the mythologies and the star lore. So absolutely, yeah.
Now, there is in most indigenous, and I guess I'm going to kind of lump the ancient Kemetic people, to an indigenous people, an indigenous spiritual people. We hear stories all over the world about the star beings, and I don't want to get too UFO-y, but I do want to touch on it. What are the thoughts of these quote unquote hieroglyphs of helicopters and hovercrafts and UFOs, and what has kind of been the collective reasoning behind all of these? And is there perhaps a connection, even within their own mythology, of star beings that came to visit at one point?
Well, okay. I'm not gonna, I don't rule this out. As far as the glyphs of the helicopters and the hovercraft and the, submarine or whatever, we really have studied this in great depth. Our another member of our team is Muhammad Ibrahim. He is our tour director and guide, but he's also become a Khemitologist. And so the three of us, do a lot of this research together, along with Stephen. And, we've got a huge Kemet School family with Brian Forrester and everyone that we work with. But anyway, we've studied this and come to the conclusion that it was probably a result of, they call it Pomplacet, but really it was not the original hieroglyph. It was somehow either intentionally done or mistakenly done, and to look different than what it should. And the way I look at this is, if the ancient Kemetians, as we understand them, had such a deep connection to nature and a resonance with nature, and they understood that we had to live in resonance with nature. And so their energy, their tools, if we look at the pyramid structures, everything utilizes natural elements. They used implosive technologies. So why would they use the same kind of explosive technologies that we use today that harm the environment? It's not something they would have done. Now, as far as the star children, or star, I have an interesting opinion about this, because I see so much as energy, and I see in the symbolism that they talk about energy. If we look at our reality, the world we experience through our senses isn't really what we think it is. We're really all just energetic beings. We are light. We are we're all just light, expressing ourselves uniquely. It's one of my favorite phrases. Mm-hmm. And so what is a star being except us? And again, we use the term alien is this label that is almost this, the biggest label we use for separation. It's everything I'm not. It's an alien.
Right.
Well, but we are all energetic beings. And I do believe that the stars, we are interacting with the stars outside ourselves. And I believe, we have chakra. Okay, we have stars within us, as without, so within. And so, yes, there's a magnetic connection, but I believe star seeding is really about cycles that change the way we vibrate. And we do have connections to different stars, but these stars affect us. When you look historically, and this may not be relevant, but I think it is. We look at things like there was a supernova event out of the Pleiades 540 million years ago, and this event caused I consider, and scientists are considering possibly caused the event on Earth. It's called the Cambrian explosion, when living organisms first appear on Earth. Is this why we consider ourselves birthed from the Pleiades?
Oh, that's a great observation, actually.
We tend to want to personalize everything and make everything the way we experience it physically, but we are really all energetic beings. And so I just like to look at things a little differently. And so.
It's not too different from the way I look at things either, Patricia. I can relate to what you're saying, and like you said, we are made up of stardust, as Carl Sagan said. There is that connection.
Yes.
There is absolutely that connection to the cosmos, and perhaps these people were aware of that.
I,
And
I they were, yes.
and my own little hypothesis as well is that a lot of let's say they go into a deep trance or something, they could come in contact with perhaps a transdimensional entity or something of that, of that expression.
I,
I like to think that aliens aren't really aliens; they're just transdimensional entities in another dimension that we just happen to be able to get in contact with. They're right here. We just don't see them all the time.
what they are aspects of ourselves existing in other dimensions. These are just
Exactly.
other aspects of us, in my
Absolutely.
opinion.
Absolutely. Anyway, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to wrap up our wonderful discussion with Patricia Awyan.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I'm having a wonderful discussion with Patricia Awyan. I can't believe it's almost over. It's gone by so quickly. I could go another hour speaking with you, Patricia. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
I have so many more questions, but let me first start off with you guys, the School of Ancient Mysticism. I'm sorry, the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism. The crew is going to be doing you're going to be doing another wonderful tour. God, in just a few weeks, lucky you. With Stephen Mailer and Brian Forster. Can you tell everybody listening a little bit about that? Where you guys going to be going, and where can they find out more information?
They can find out more information on our website, Khemitology.com. It's Khemitology.com. And yes, we're very excited. We have an amazing, wonderful group forming. There's still time to sign on. It's from March 8th to March 21st, and we're going to be seeing all the normal sites. We're doing the Giza Plateau privates and the King's Chamber, of course, and we're going to the Serapeum. We are, one of the big highlights on this tour is we're going to take the group to Amarna. We'll be staying in Minya, and then we'll be going to the Akhenaten City of the Sun in Amarna. And we'll be talking a lot about our feelings about Akhenaten and what he really represented. And we'll be going to Tuna El Gebel, where we'll take people into the underground area or tunnels where they call it the cemetery for the ibis or the baboons. Which is much, much more than that as well. And we'll be taking people to Beni Hassan, which has some amazing, the locals call them the sound healing caves, but lots of beautiful imagery. And again, lots to talk about from the 18th dynasty that people are familiar with Akhenaten. And then, of course, we're doing the luxurious Nile cruise and going to the temples of Dendera and just so many different places. And, the highlight really is that we're going to show people an alternative look at the sites. We will show you the anomalies that have everyone asking questions about the truth of what we've been given as the heritage of Egypt. And the best part is we have people, you have Yousef and as I mentioned, Muhammad, Ibrahim, and me, but we're also bringing along Brian Forster, who's become quite famous with his similar work to what he does in Peru and Bolivia, and amazing things that Brian's doing. And then, of course, Stephen Mailer, who you spoke with just a couple of weeks ago, one of the longtime students and first students of Hakim, who became really a son in the family, and he's our brother now, and he has an amazing legacy of information to share. And so you get all of us at the sites. And the funniest thing, Bernard, is we often, even our group members, they become, they get so caught up in what we're doing, and they all learn how to see and find that they find things that we haven't seen before. So, there have been things that we hadn't seen, that, major discoveries at some of the temples we visit all the time. So every tour is an adventure and unique, and the group, the bonding that occurs, it's just, and just powerful, really powerful adventures. And we remain friends with these people forever. So yeah, I encourage anybody who's interested in coming to Egypt to come and join us, because every experience we have is precious.
Unbelievable. Well, hopefully I will be able to get over there one of these years before you guys stop doing it.
I sure hope you do. I would love it.
I would love it. I've been invited to Egypt so many times, not only by you guys and Gary, and I think I was invited to dance, or they wanted me to do a ritual at the Temple of Isis like 15 years ago. This woman from Egypt, she was a one of the world's most famous belly dancers or whatever. Anyway, I created a great relationship with her, and she had this women's only tour where they were going to go dance at the Temple of Isis, but they wanted me to perform a some type of ritual or something. She's like, you would be the only man there. I'm like, well, thank you. I'm very honored.
As where you should be.
But I didn't go. But I would have loved to have done something like that, and I would love to do something like what you're doing, and spend time with you guys. I'm afraid if I ever went there, I wouldn't want to come back either.
It's been known to happen.
I don't want to leave these people, and I don't want to leave this place. But
it is magical. It really is amazing here.
Now, you mentioned Akhenaten, and he is so controversial to so many people, even from the conspiracy folks who think he's like the pre-incarnation of Obama to those that were like, how dare he created the first omnipotent, singular being of divinity. And he created monotheism, and so, but all in all, wasn't he like a reformer? Isn't that what he was trying to do? What's his story with Akhenaten? With these few minutes that we have, what did he do right? What did he do wrong?
Well, boy, there's, as you said, much controversy about this. As a reformer, I believe that his father, Amenhotep the Third, began, some of the changes. And then, Akhenaten was born given the name Amenhotep the Fourth, and changed his name to Akhenaten, Aten being the label given for the high cycle. And so, I see him as, and we've discussed this with Stephen, and Hakeem left us a lot of clues, but I see him as revering, this energy, this unified resonance that we had during a high cycle, a high stage of consciousness. And so, he would have himself portrayed differently. Like all the pharaohs that you see are all portrayed in perfect physique. It's like, okay, I'm sure they weren't so perfect.
Right, so beautiful.
This is how they're portrayed on the temple walls. And of course, Akhenaten comes along, and you see him portrayed with, breasts and a big belly, and and this long face, and maybe an elongated skull, and you got to wonder what's up with this. So of course, Egyptologists say, he had some sort of disease. Well, I look at it and say, wow, he's got a big belly like he's pregnant, and breasts like the mother, the woman. Is he possibly, as part of this reverence, is he reminding us about, the reverence for the mother, the maternal, the matriarchal, not the domineering, the dominance of women, but this matriarchal mother energy, the nurturing, protective love of the mother, the healing love of the mother. Is he reminding us that this is the powerful energy of the high cycle? I believe that this is what we're talking about. And so I think this is what he was trying to hang on to and left for us in the symbolism, that there is a better way to be. And this is why he would turn his back on the priests, because of course they were twisting the truth in order to forward their agendas. He never, if you look at some of his symbolism, you still see the netters portrayed. So it's not like he said, oh, no, they don't exist. But he understood that they existed as, symbolic representation of the nature of energy, of our reality.
So it's almost like they became the saints. In other words, they were just forces of nature, not necessarily the force of all nature, I guess.
I think combined, they give us a map of our reality. 360, consider just the use of that. 360 degrees in a circle, 300 degrees, angles of light. They're tones, okay? There are senses, they're archetypes,
right.
They're frequencies, they're colors. When I say angles of light, do our angels, are they, this is where the angels come from. The angels are a new label for our netters. Again, I can talk about at great length about this, but you're looking at the concept, even if you, and I'll do this quickly, but if you consider just the symbol of the sun, which is the circle with the dot in the center, and consider the unified high cycle as that dot, you're pulled into unity, and then you breathe. Everything that alive pulses. So you breathe out your aspects when we move into a lower cycle, so separation, and then you breathe those aspects back into unity, into the center of the circle. And it gives you, and it's much more complex than that, I'm positive, but it gives you a simplified vision of possibly what we're looking at with the netters, and take that to a higher dimension, not just two-dimensional, but we're breathing in. We breathe ourselves back into unity, and then we pulse back out into, the separated aspects of self.
I love it. And I love your definition. So is it fair to say, Patricia, and I always say this, that the gods, we always talk about the gods, especially in the work that I do with the pagan community and whatnot. When I discuss the gods, I say the gods are either symbols of natural forces. They were either aliens that visited people, or they were thought forms that were created because, I forgot who said it. He said, you can turn anything into a god. When you get enough people thinking on it, you create this thought form with its own personality. So like I said, they're either thought forms, aliens, or natural forces. And the Egyptians were, I guess, evolved enough to see them as natural forces. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Absolutely. Take Jehuti, okay, Thoth. Thoth is thought. He's cosmic consciousness. He has two forms. He's the ibis head, or he's the human form with an ibis head, or he's the baboon. The ibis, in his ibis form, he is wisdom from above, cosmic consciousness. When he is in his baboon form, he is wisdom from within. This is our unique inner consciousness, our connection. We are unique, but we are connected to cosmic consciousness. So, he represents both. So
I guess, and thank you for explaining that. But maybe my question should be: did they anthropomorphize their gods and goddesses? And in other words, did they think Isis was this being floating around them, and like she would come and visit them?
No. Right. Representation of an energetic force of nature. That's what's so funny.
Well, that's why I bring it up, is that here we have in modern religion, everything's been anthropomorphized. They're like, they're real. God's out there with a beard, and he's looking at me, and he knows what I'm doing,
Exactly. look outside yourself for your definition. This is what they're telling us. It's look outside yourself. But the funny thing is, everything we're experiencing outside ourselves is a reflection of what's going on within. And then, they can program us through our fear and separation and all this to believe all this stuff that we don't, and so we experience our world based on our core beliefs. So that's why I think it's so important for us. We don't put our heads in the sand, but we stop absorbing everything, and taking it as it is. And we really start to look a little deeper and look, change, look with different eyes, and try and enhance our sensibilities and levels of awareness in order to experience this reality on a much higher level.
Beautiful. And from what I hear, and I've spoken with you, I've spoken to Stephen, I've spoken to Gary, so many of you that go on these wonderful tours, the energy of these temples, you literally do get to feel a little bit of a shift in consciousness in some of these sites. Is that what you experience as well?
Absolutely. There are areas, we take people to we have some favorite spots, some, subterranean chambers where we experience sound resonance. And of course, sound resonance, if you can Google that, you can find, that we can create fields where, I call them electromagnetic 0-point fields, but it's really a field where you can, we have spontaneous healings. People have amazing aha moments. I believe it's a field where you can literally walk through dimensions. So yeah, this is one of the things we work a lot with is tone and resonance. And we feel that, a lot of these ancient pre-dynastic tools that they used, utilized, it was all about sound, running water. They used, again, it's a natural sound is vibration. It's the pulse of life. I mean, it's even the spark of life that fertilizes the egg. And as I said, everything's patterned after bioorganic processes.
Absolutely. Actually, when Stephen was on here a couple of weeks ago, we were talking. We were speculating on maybe sound is how they built some of these structures. Maybe sound had something to do with either the form or the movement of the blocks, or who knows what the technology is that they had with sound.
I totally agree. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, the temples, some of the monument areas, there's an energy that pulses here. Sometimes there are certain areas that I can just sit and you can feel there's a pulse coming, within, coming out. They chose these sites because of the energy emanating from the earth, just like we have, they call it maybe acupuncture points or whatever. We have pulse points on our bodies. The earth is a body itself, and it has pulse points. And so these sites are built on these points where, there's an energy emanating. So they utilize this energy that's already powerful. And then, they build these structures that enhance it. And so, yes, I would never tell anybody that they have to travel, to sacred sites in the world to have a euphoric experience. No, you can learn to have this in anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do experience the sites, it can enhance not only your understanding of what's possible, but it gives you an idea of how to achieve some of these states. So, not everybody's even looking for that. There's so many different, no matter what you come to Egypt for, the one thing I've noticed is when you leave, you leave a different person. And, Egypt still has an effect on people for many months after they return to their homes, because, it's just a very powerful place. And there are other places in the world that are just like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the idea that, like you said, anywhere can be a sacred place. I feel a change after I go up to a mountain. I find, actually, I live here because I love the mountains. I feel like they're alive and they speak to me, and it's just absolutely beautiful, and it does change your consciousness. It really does. Patricia, And we have about 4 more minutes left, but I want to ask you this a little early, and I probably asked you this last time you were on the show. And the reason why I'm asking a little early is because sometimes I like to make a comment and I can't because we run out of time. So, Mike, my last question to you is with all that you have learned from Hakeem, from Stephen, from being in Egypt, from your husband, and all of the research you have done, if you knew that the entire world was listening to this broadcast right now, you had everyone's ear on the planet, what would that one message be to everybody from your experience that you would like to share with everybody?
Oh, wow. I
Take a
would
moment.
first say, we don't die. We are eternal beings of light. And I would say that that life there the thing I think that empowers anybody is that there is really nothing to be afraid of, and that life just needs to be lived and enjoyed, and that you experience what you place your heartfelt intention, your focus on. And so, we choose our reality as we move through this life. And so if we choose our attitude, and if we choose to hop, skip, and jump and have a good time, that's exactly what's going to happen. We can have a magical and amazing experience. We are the magicians. We are the creators of our own experience. And so I would just encourage everybody to make, to hop, skip, and jump. Be lighthearted. There is a message within the judgment scene.
And that is to lighten the heart. Exactly. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. The idea that we're here to suffer or to sacrifice is not what it is. We are here to be happy and to be joyful, I would think.
Yes,
And
I think so.
anyway, unfortunately, we are out of time, and I want to take this last minute to remind everybody about the tour that you have coming up. What is the name of the tour? So when they get on the site, they can click on the right banner.
It's the Techno Spiritual Tour 3. This is our third event with Brian Forrester and Stephen Mailer.
Wonderful. And that's at Khemitology.com, Kheme. IT.
OLOGY.
Khemitology.com. Triva, if you can post that link, that would be great on the chat. And again, I just want to thank you so much for joining us and spending these 2 hours with me as usual. I'm gonna have to pick like one topic and bring you back for that one topic, because it feels like we scanned about 20 topics, but you could have gone on a lot of these topics.
Yeah, I tend to. I'm just so passionate about all of this, and I would
Absolutely.
absolutely love that. It's a pleasure being interviewed by you, Bernard. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I really appreciate you too and all the work that you guys are doing. A big hello to your husband and to Stephen and Brian when you see them. I got to have Brian back on the show soon, maybe. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Next week, we will be interviewing Jason Gregory, who will be joining me live from India, speaking about his new work that he's doing there. And we love you guys. Have a great week.